Hello, everyone, and welcome. So glad you're joining us today, no matter where or how you're joining. Perhaps you're in your Anywhere group, sitting in a living room. Maybe you're outside. Maybe you're at the cafe. What's a cafe? Maybe Starbucks. You're watching this. However you're engaging with us, we're just so excited that you are joining us. And we're going to be talking and jumping into a Bible verse and a chapter, and we're going Old Testament today, which I know can seem a little bit intimidating because it can seem like the stories are kind of irrelevant, and what are they talking about, and who are these people, and how do all these old dead people's lives really matter to me and the stories that they were going through? And while it is true that God was working through some people and working in history, there are some things that we can learn about the character of God as we read these stories that can apply to us corporately, they can apply to us individually or to our families. It's really, truly amazing how God's word, when we jump in, when we dive in, that through his spirit, he can really begin to speak to us, and we can develop and even see his character that he has, or the things that he wants to do for us in our lives, in the same way that he moved in people's lives so many years ago. So we're going to jump into a book that's probably not something that's on the top of your reading list. We're going to go to the book of Judges. Now, what is that all about, the book of Judges? And a real quick flyover history on this. Way back in the day, God's people kind of went through this process where they were close to God and they were far to God. They were close to him and they were far to him. And every time they would get far away, punishment would kind of show up. There would be consequences. They would kind of get their act together and they're like, oh God, we love you. You're so wonderful. And things were great again. And so in this process, God sends them these judges. They were people who were going to rule over the people, but they were also the ones who would help God's people find their freedom once again, to overcome their enemies. And there were all kinds of judges. There were actually 12 of them. There were major and minor ones. No one really remembers the minor ones. We remember some of the big ones like Deborah, Judge Judy. No, I'm just kidding. But she would be a major one if she was in there. But we're going to talk about a guy named Gideon. Most people would say the most famous would be Samson. But we're going to talk about Gideon today because, Samson kind of gets all the fame. We're going to go in. And maybe you've heard of this guy before. Maybe you have never heard this story. You have no idea what we're talking about. We're going to go right to Judges chapter 7. I'm going to read you a few things from this chapter, and we're going to dive in and unpack this for us. So Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, his army got up and went as far as the spring of Herod. The armies of Midian were camped out north of them in the valley in the hill. So what is this all about? So God is going to deliver God's people. Remember, he's going to deliver them from their enemies, which are the Midianites. So this is what this is talking about. God is setting up Gideon to be able to overcome their army. He's got to take on their army with his army, and we're going to see who's going to win. And the armies of Midian were camped north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. And then God said to Gideon, "You have too many warriors with you. If I let all of you fight the Midianites, the Israelites will boast to me that they have saved themselves by their own strength. Therefore, tell the people, whoever is timid and afraid may leave this mountain and go home." So 22,000 of them went home, leaving only 10,000 who were willing to fight. Man, things are looking real great. Thanks, God. Yeah, we're going to go take on their army, so you're going to strip away 22,000, but 10,000 is not too bad, right? Well, the story continues in verse 4, but then the Lord told Gideon, "There are still too many. Bring them down to the spring. I will test to determine who will go with you and who will not." Then Gideon took his warriors down to the water. The Lord told him, "Divide the men into two groups. In one group, put all those whose cupped water in their hands and lap it up with their tongues like dogs. In the other group, put those who kneel down and drink with their mouths in the stream." Now only 300 of the men drank from their hands. All the others got down and drank straight from the milk carton, and God sent them home. Not from home, So he divides them, once again, splits it down to 300, and this is what God says to him. Then the Lord told Gideon, "With these 300 men, I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites. Send all the others home." So Gideon collected the provisions, the ram horns, the other warriors, and sent them home, but kept 300 men with them. Now, hold up, we're going to pause right here, because what is going on? First, we start with 33,000 men. We got to do a little reverse math. You know that meme where like the math and the numbers are all going from? That's like what we're doing right now in the Bible. 33,000 people, or 32,000. Brian can't even do math. I need the meme in front of me. 32,000 men pared down all the way to 300. What is God doing? They're supposed to be taking on this mighty army that's already outnumbering them, and God says, "No, there's too many people. I've got to pare this down. We've got to make this work." Because why? God tells them that if you do this in your own strength, your own might, your own numbers, the people are just going to say, "We did this. Look how awesome our army is. We're bad. We got this. Yeah, you know it. 32,000, man, we went down and crushed them. We schooled them. It was over." God said, no. That's not how this is going to go down. We're going to pare them all the way down from 32,000 just to 300 men who are going to take care of this, and they're going to defeat the army. Now, that sounds crazy. And how could that possibly apply to our lives? Well, I think in a couple of ways that it can. And corporately, we could take a look at this, and even the journey that we've been in, that Pastor Zach has been sharing with us, and so many of the dreams and visions that God has given us at Hill City, it could seem like, man, we've got to have the numbers, we've got to have the resources. There are a whole lot of people who are far from God, and we want them to know God. We want them to be introduced and become disciples and followers of Jesus. There's an entire next generation who is so far from God. And how can we do this? God, you've got to give us the goods. We need the resources. You've got to make this happen. And I think it's just as we see this, God is all about stacking the odds. And it seems like, well, we need to hedge the bets. God, we need the 32,000. Let's tee it up for God real nice so he can take care of us. And God's saying, no, I've got this. Why? Because it's not going to be in your own strength. It's not going to be in your own ability. It's not going to be in your own might. It's going to be because I said it's going to happen, and I'm going to make this happen for you. Why? So that he can receive all the glory. And I believe that's what God's calling to us as a church. And not only that he's speaking to that as an individual. That in our families, in our marriage, in our relationship, in our finances, in our pursuit and relationship of following after him, we try to do it in our own strength, our own ability. And God's like, no, we got to pare that down. And we're like, God, I got to hedge the bets here. You don't know me. I don't think I can do this. And he's like, it's not going to be in your own strength. It's going to be because I'm going to do this for you. And what I love about the story of Gideon is that it goes on because maybe like Gideon, you might be thinking, God's got the wrong person. He's got the wrong man. He's got the wrong woman. I'm just a teenager. He has got the wrong person for the job. And if that's where you were at, you're in good company. This is exactly where Gideon was. It picks up in verse 8. The Gideon was in the Midianite camp. They were just below Gideon. And I love this in verse 9. That night the Lord said, get up, go into the Midianite camp, for I have given you victory over them. Well, it's like game over. That's all we need to hear. God said we got it, but that's not where God stops. In verse 10 he says, but if you are afraid to attack, if you're a chicken, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen what the Midianites are saying, and you will be greatly encouraged. Then you will be eager to attack. Okay, God, I'm going to go listen to the enemy, and then I'm going to be encouraged. So Gideon does just that. He gets his servant. They go down to the edge of the camp, and the armies of Midian and the people east and settled in the valley. They're like swarms of locusts. They're everywhere. Their camels were like grains of sand on the seashore, too many to count. And you just picture Gideon creeping over, just as a man was telling his companion, his enemy was telling him this dream. And in this dream, he tells him about this loaf of barley bread that came tumbling down into the camp, and then it turned over and it knocked the tent flat. And his companion answered, your dream can only mean one thing, that God has given Gideon, the Israelite, victory over Midian and all of its allies. When Gideon heard this dream and its interpretation, he bowed and worshiped to God, and he probably did one of those sweet, like, yes, we've got this. God is with us. He says, get up, go, for the victory is yours over all of the hordes. He divided the 300 men into 3 groups, gave each of them a ram's horn, gives them a clay jar, and they put a torch in it. And he just gives them some simple instructions. Go to the edge of camp, and when I tell you to do this, and they blow on the horns, they break the jars all at one time. It was right after midnight, the changing of the guard. The people just freak out. The Midianite army, they don't know what's going on. They are so confused that they just start going to battle each other. They're like just taking each other out. I mean, it's just crazy. God does this, and it says that God causes the confusion that make them fight each other. Can you see Gideon and his army just standing up there, blowing on a horn, holding the torch, and they're just down there defeating themselves? Why? Because God is doing it for them. And it continues in chapter 7 and 8 in the victory that God hands to Gideon and his 300 men and what he does to overcome so many more. So if you feel like Gideon felt, you are in great company. Maybe like him, you feel like we don't have enough resources. I don't have the goods. I don't have the education. I don't have the training. I don't have the knowledge. I can't follow after God. I can't lead my family. I can't pursue this relationship or whatever it is that God has placed before you. And you're like, God, it seems like it's not there. God's saying, I've got this. It's not in your own strength. Why? Because it's going to bring God the most glory when this happens in our lives. And just like Gideon, you might feel like, God, I know you're saying I can do this, but if you could hear the enemy and what he is saying about you, just like Gideon's enemy, you're like, oh man, this is over. Gideon is totally going to win. He's going to defeat all of us. That our enemies, the same thing has happened. He knows he's a defeated foe. And if you could hear and see the fear in his eyes and know that there is nothing that can hold you back when God is for you. So friends, I want to encourage you with that today. And a little reminder as we read about Gideon in the book of Judges, I'm going to throw it back to your leader. If you're in a group, you're just going to take some time and read through this chapter. Good news for you. If you like Gideon, you're like, hey, I want to check a little bit more of Gideon's story. Judges 6, 7, and 8. There's some other good stuff in there. You can pick one of those chapters, and depending on how your group goes, read through those. Find something that sticks out to you, what God is speaking to you in that moment. So important that we spend time in God's word together. And if you're not with the group and you're kind of doing this solo, or maybe with your family, you can do the same thing, or just read through that chapter and just take a moment and ask God, just speak to me by your Spirit. What is something that you're trying to show me? How does this apply to my life? God, what are you doing in speaking to me through your word today? Friends, we're so excited that you're joining us and so excited that we get to spend time in God's word and hear what he is speaking to us individually and even corporately as a church.